Skyward Sword is a game I happen to really love, and a large part of my enjoyment comes from the unique visual design and aesthetic choices that make the game really stand out. I do recognise that the game does have its fair share of issues, a lot of them with regards to the game's pacing and the repetition of the imprisoned boss fight. There's also some wonky mechanics, and most disappointingly to me, the rather empty sky that failed to live up to the high watermark set by the Wind Waker's Great Sea. However, I would propose that Skyward Sword has some of the most immersive, beautiful, and thickly atmospheric dungeons in the entire series that are further elevated because they're inspired by vibrant cultures that are often underrepresented in video games. I personally love it when a game has a unique atmosphere you can't find elsewhere, and Skyward Sword ticks that box for me. Traditionally, Zelda games have incorporated lots of Japanese culture, folklore, and religion into their world building, but uniquely, Skyward Sword looks further afield to the cultures of Southeast Asia to inform its design. This adds a really rich layer of visual flair, but can also lead to some really interesting lore interpretations of the various dungeons. In this video, I want to share my passion for the game, and I want to explore the real-world art, cultures, and ideas that have snuck their way into Skyward Sword. I'll also be taking a look at the in-game lore ramifications of these ideas too. I'll be discussing 3 dungeons in particular: the Earth Temple, the Ancient Cistern, and the Fire Sanctuary. Check the description for chapter timestamps if you want to see one section in particular. Get ready for plenty of lore theories, Buddhist references, over-analysis, mispronunciation, and lots of headcanon. If you have any theories of your own, or you've spotted anything cool about Skyward Sword that I didn't mention, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear more. Now, if you've got your cup of tea ready, let's dive right in with the first of the 3. Welcome to the Earth Temple, a lava-infested temple hidden within Elden Volcano. When I first played through Skyward Sword, I was blown away by this dungeon, and it was at this point that I couldn't help but draw comparisons between some of the art and architecture here and real-life buildings and statues originating in Southeast Asia. My suspicions were validated when I read the excellent Hyrule Historia. On page 49 there's a quote attributed to both Hidemaru Fujibayashi, the game's director, and Shonichi Shirai, one of the designers. It reads, "We wanted to allow the player to have fun with differences in elevation, so we immediately decided to add mountains. In the primitive volcanic belt lies ruins that have slowly lost the battle with time and have the reputation of being infested with bokoblin monsters. The dungeon design was based off Southeast Asian architecture and colouring, which is why you see extensive use of vibrant primary colours." The Earth Temple greets us immediately with some elephant statuettes. In Thailand, the white elephant is considered a symbol of royalty due to its rarity. So much so that the flag of Siam, as Thailand was once known as, long bore the image of a white elephant on it. So interlinked were the ideas of royalty and white elephants in Thailand that the more white elephants a monarch owned, the more power they were perceived to have. With all of this in mind, the presence of these white elephants suggests the temple may well have been built in honor of someone or something incredibly powerful or regal. Who or what exactly? I'll try and answer that later, but it's a curious detail because, to my knowledge, no elephant-like creatures have ever been seen in a Zelda game. The white elephant is also a prominent Buddhist symbol, as a white elephant featured in the dream of Maya, the Buddha's mother, prophesizing the birth of the Buddha. More Buddhist symbols can be found throughout the Earth Temple, such as patterns of 8, for example. The number 8 holds religious significance in Buddhism, symbolizing the Eightfold Path, one of the religion's most important set of tenets that guides Buddhists in how they should act in life. In my opinion, the most striking statues to be found here are a little further in, the ones half submerged in lava, and the ones adorning the walls in some sections of the temple. With large eyes, protruding nostrils, and gritted teeth, it's hard not to draw a comparison between the submerged busts and the beautifully grotesque faces to be found in the carved ceremonial barong masks of Bali, or indeed the ceremonial masks of Sri Lanka, used in traditional dances. In reality, intricately designed and vibrantly painted masks have formed an important part of folk dancing throughout many parts of Asia for centuries. There are similar bulging-eyed statues carved into the walls and some rooms of the temple. There's a room where Link has to fight some Lizalfos before he can exit, and the statues can be found on the walls in this room. These particular carvings have tusks and wing-like ears, bringing to mind the omnipresent Varpala that serve as guardians at many of Thailand's temples and palaces. These particular guardian statues are doing a common Buddhist hand gesture known as Vitakka Mudra, representing the discussion and transmission of the teachings of the Buddha. It's worth noting that this gesture is usually only done with one hand in Buddhist art, unlike the statues in the game. As with some Balinese barong masks, these statues also have a third eye in the middle of their forehead, a significant religious symbol, usually indicating a state of enlightenment, the end goal in Buddhism. A few of the demonic faces are in fact only half faces, adorning an archway or gateway. The idea of a portion of a demonic face poking over the top of something is reminiscent of the Wheel of Life, commonly depicted in Tibetan art, being held by the form of either Mara or Yama, with only the top half of their heads visible. These fearsome statues are kind of ironic. Based on real-life figures who protect temples from evil demons and spirits, the monster-infested nature of the Earth Temple suggests that the Guardian statues have failed in their protective duties. One of the unique gimmicks of this particular dungeon is riding the eyeball of a befallen statue to safely traverse a lake of lava. It's kind of poetic that one Guardian's eye is even used to traverse the temple and let Link access its inner sanctum. It really shows just how far the Earth Temple has fallen since its glory days. The Guardians also create an ambiguity as to the origins of the temple. They look vaguely similar to bokoblins. So, did bokoblins help in the temple's construction? The Guardians look dissimilar enough to make this an unconvincing theory. Returning to the Lizalfos room, you'll notice that there are also serpent motifs in this dungeon. Serpents don't have the same negative connotation in Buddhism as in the West. For example, one Buddhist story tells of a deity in the form of a king cobra, who once shielded the Buddha from the rain during his quest for enlightenment. The frequency of dragon and serpent imagery might give us a clue as to who this temple was built for. The most likely candidate is Eldin, the fire dragon who appears in the game, though one interesting post on ZeldaUniverse.net suggests the dragon imagery is more akin to another Zelda dragon, Volvagia. Volvagia is an ancient dragon who, as legend has it, was slain long ago by a legendary Goron hero, before being revived much later by Ganondorf to protect the Fire Temple from intrusion during the events of Ocarina of Time. The dragons that decorate the doors of the temple in particular look a lot more like Volvagia than Eldin, and there's a gigantic skeleton of a dragon suspended on the roof of the temple, which might well be Volvagia's remains after being slain. This would make Eldin Volcano an early incarnation of Death Mountain, which features prominently in other games, because that was where Volvagia dwelled. The Serpentile theme is a stroke of genius. It gives veteran Zelda players a visual clue that some Lizalfos fights are coming up, but it also subtly harkens back to that Southeast Asian aesthetic. The dragon depicted might not be Eldin or Volvagia, but instead it might allude to Antiboga, perhaps, a pre-Islamic world serpent of Javanese origin, often found decorating temples in Bali. I'd like to put forward a final theory though. The temple may not have been built with any creature in mind at all. Volcanoes like Mount Agung in Bali and Baba Chandrakup in Pakistan are revered as embodiments of the Hindu god Shiva. Perhaps the overpowering nature of Eldin Volcano inspired a similar reverence in Skyward Sword, and the dragon imagery is just mere decoration. After all, Eldin the Dragon states, "There was a time when those above ground and those below lived together in harmony by the blessing of the great mountain." There's also some Chinese influences to be found within the Earth Temple. There are gigantic dragon statues that can be found towards the end of this dungeon, and they look just like classical dragons from Chinese folklore. which has in turn influenced Southeast Asian culture. In Thailand, the dragon long ago entered the popular imagination, and gigantic dragons of a similar scale to those in the Earth Temple can actually be found in structures in real life. Take a look at Wat Sampram, just outside of Bangkok, for an impressive looking example. I think Skyward Sword having a partial Southeast Asian Buddhist aesthetic gives the game a deeper meaning perhaps. Skyward Sword is, after all, meant to be the first canonical Legend of Zelda game, starting a long and confusing chronology. So many ideas are reused and recycled in subsequent adventures, and if you look closely enough, you'll find Buddhist ideas permeating the entire Zelda series. For example, Link appears in so many games, it raises questions about the concept of reincarnation within the Zelda universe. Heck, Tingle claims to be the reincarnation of a fairy. Ultimately, I quite like the idea that the temple fails to answer a lot of important questions about its own origin, leaving it shrouded in a cloud of mystery. Who built the temple? Who's it dedicated to? Why is it called the Earth Temple if it's infested with lava? Like an explorer stumbling upon an ancient ruin, we have to piece the temple's origins together as best we can while marveling at its ruined beauty. Let's move on to our next dungeon. The ancient cistern is, by all accounts, a structure designed to purify the waters of Lake Floria. In English, this dungeon is the ancient cistern, which is a purely secular description of the place, but the Japanese name, Inishie no Daisakutsu, has a much more religious connotation. Daisakutsu means great cavern, grotto or cave, but it's usually used to refer to cave temples, such as the Longmen Grottos, an example found in China, raising questions as to whether the cistern serves both a practical and spiritual purpose. Visually, it's hard to ignore the fact that the smiling statue in the middle of the room shares a lot of similarities with statues of the Buddha. In early concept art, it seems the central figure was going to look slightly different, more akin to the gigantic Buddhist and Hindu faces that can be found decorating the Angkor Temple complex in Cambodia. The central Buddha structure also has an entire lower body that can be found initially submerged underwater, seated in a pose with legs down and hands resting on knees, a much less common pose than the seated cross-legged lotus position, but found in temples and statues nonetheless. The key that Link must collect to pass through this area also bears a striking resemblance to a small Buddha statue or Buddhist monk. In a break from the Southeast Asian theme, the hand positions of the Blessed Idol key appear to be in the Mida no Join position, which looks like the fists are together, which is more commonly found in Japanese art, not Southeast Asian. The cistern also has a door later on in the shape of a lotus flower, and lotuses, along with lily pads, can be found in the waters here and decorating the walls and floors of the cistern. There's even a small lotus on the whip that's collected in the cistern. Like the 8-spoke wheel discussed earlier, the lotus flower is a symbol synonymous with Buddhism. Lotus flowers generally grow in muddy waters, but rise and bloom above the muck, symbolizing enlightenment. As the cistern is a water temple, it's unsurprising that there's plenty of fish sculptures to be found here too, something that isn't too frequent in Southeast Asian Buddhist temples, though examples can be found in Chinese architecture, where fish gargoyles can be found on rooftops, their purpose being to provide a visually stimulating water drainage system. The truly fascinating thing about the ancient cistern is how a Buddhist story is actually interwoven into the very layout of the dungeon. There is a subterranean section that's totally different in tone to the upper portion of the dungeon. The smiling golden Buddha is replaced with a purple fiery hellscape, crawling with cursed bokoblins. The dungeon serves as a reflection of the light and darkness duality central to many religions. In a sense, this lower portion of the level is kind of Buddhist hell. In order to get out of this hell, Link has to climb a small thread to reach the upper portion of the stage again. It's a fun and spooky set piece, as a bunch of cursed bokoblins will try to follow Link up the thread. This particular set piece is directly inspired by an early 20th century short story by Japanese writer Ryunosuke Akutagawa, In Akutagawa's story, we meet a sinner by the name of Kandata. Buddha is meandering around paradise one morning when he stops at a lotus-filled pond. Between the lilies, he can see through the crystal-clear waters into the depths of hell. His eyes come to rest on one particular sinner by the name of Kandata. Kandata was a cold-hearted criminal, but had one good deed to his name. While walking through the forest one day, he decided not to kill a spider he was about to crush with his foot. Moved by this single act of compassion, the Buddha takes the silvery thread of a spider in paradise and lowers it down into hell. Down in hell, the myriad of sinners are struggling in the pool of blood in total darkness, save for the light glinting off the mountain of spikes. Kandata, looking up by chance at the sky above the pool of blood, sees the spider's thread descending towards him and grabs hold with the might of a seasoned criminal. The climb from hell to paradise is not a short one, however, and Kandata quickly tires. Dangling from the middle of the rope, he glances downwards and realizes that others have started climbing the thread behind him. Fearing that the thread will break from the weight of the others, he shouts that the spider's thread is his and his alone. It is at this moment that the thread breaks and he and all the other sinners are cast back down into the pool of blood. Unlike Kandata, Link manages to escape from hell. It's worth noting that the upper portion of the ancient cistern is crawling with sculptures, which is another little reference to this particular story. Finally, the dungeon ends with one of the game's most iconic bosses. His 6 arms and highly decorative attire bring to mind the Asura demigods or titans of Buddhist mythology that derive from Hinduism, a religion whose stories are populated with multi-limbed demons, gods, and other figures. Online sources have cited that files in the game refer to Coloctus as Asura, though I've not seen any hard evidence of this yet. What exactly are the lore implications of a temple like this existing in the Zelda universe? Are we to assume that Buddhism exists in the world of Zelda? I'm not so sure, but surely the cistern was built with more than one purpose in mind. Its practical purpose is to drain and filter impure water into its lower sanctums, and funnel pure water back up into the upper areas. But this masks a trial for anyone trying to access Faror's flame hidden in the heart of the cistern. Ascending to the highest chamber of the dungeon requires traversing the underworld, before returning back to paradise, a sobering journey representative of being reborn into the Buddhist realms that resemble heaven and hell, realms that people temporarily reside in as part of the endless cycle of rebirth and reincarnation. The true secret of the ancient cistern is that it's not just the hellish underworld that can trap intruders, but the heavenly upper chambers too. In Buddhism, the beautiful tranquility of the heavenly realms can be so seductive it can knock believers off their paths to enlightenment, which I believe is the purpose of the immaculately gorgeous upper areas of the cistern, protecting Faror's flame by way of its paradise-like atmosphere. It serves as a stark reminder of the ever-turning wheel of life and the different types of difficulties that come when on the quest to attain Buddhahood. The ancient cistern is, in my mind, one of the most ambitious dungeons in Zelda's history, sneaking in a Buddhist parable in a way that doesn't intrude on the gameplay. And that brings me to part 3. The Fire Sanctuary is a kind of temple complex nestled in the middle of a mountain range. It's striking, and brings to mind similar complexes in the Himalayas in Bhutan or Nepal, for example. The Fire Sanctuary is a little bit different from the other 2 dungeons, because it allows us to appreciate the external architecture of the game a little bit more. As you might expect, fire imagery is everywhere here, from rooftops to doors. The style of the rooftops serve a very cool dual purpose. They look awesome, like roofs decorated with flames, but they also kind of look similar to Thai and Burmese temples and palace architecture. This curved, flame-like design is a common architectural trope, and these spined decorations are in real life not flames, but fins of the mythological Naga creatures, feathers of the mythological beast Garuda, or simple patterns based on lotus or jasmine flowers. Flame designs also litter the walls of the sanctuary, and are most evident on the sanctuary's final door. The style of the flames is again similar to Buddhist art. While it makes sense for a lava-infested sanctuary to be decorated with fire motifs, flames in Tibetan Buddhist art denote purity, with fire burning away ignorance of the mind. It's another nice little detail that potentially hides a dual meaning here. The fire sanctuary is also decorated with a few interesting animal statues. Frog faces are dotted all around this area and serve a puzzle function, but frogs are sights that aren't too common in Southeast Asian temple decorations. They are nevertheless an occasional feature of Buddhist temples throughout Asia in the form of statues, but they're much more commonly depicted in Japanese Shinto shrines or Chinese Taoist temples. In both cases, frogs are a symbol of good luck. Pilgrims passing through the fire sanctuary certainly require a lot of luck to traverse the tough terrain. Bird statues, including owl statuettes, also populate this temple. Owls do have a particular link with Myanmar, where they're considered symbols of good luck again, especially in pairs. Small owl statues can commonly be found as souvenirs in Myanmar, and I also found an example of a larger owl decorating a Burmese temple. The truth is, the fire sanctuary has a huge amount of bird statues, including ones that are identical to those found in the sky. This is kind of interesting because it suggests a direct link between the builders of the Sky Sanctuary and the denizens of the sky above, who also, of course, retain a bird-based culture. This link to the sky isn't as evident in any of the game's other dungeons. The bird statues do raise questions about who exactly built the Fire Sanctuary though. The fact is that Link can only enter the sanctuary after obtaining the Fire Shield earring. This is because the Fire Sanctuary is protected by the exceedingly hot volcano summit that serves as its entranceway. This kind of disqualifies the idea that the humans of the sky, or at least their ancestors, were the builders of the sanctuary. The abundance of underground passageways here might point to the mole-like Mogmas being the sanctuary's architects, but plenty of Mogmas seem completely ignorant of the sanctuary's layout and history, so maybe not. Another candidate could be the Gorons, who typically live in mountainous regions in other Zelda installments. The architecture of the Fire Sanctuary seems a little bit more intricate than the Gorons' usual style though. I guess it's another of Skyward Sword's mysteries, though there are one or two superficial links between the Fire Sanctuary and Ocarina of Time's Fire Temple. Both make extensive use out of wire mesh platforms, and both have a couple of Islamic references. Talking of the wire mesh platforms, the lattice design of some of the walls and the curved archways found throughout the Fire Sanctuary are Islamic in origin, bringing to mind the magnificent Alhambra in Granada, Spain. You can also argue that the tall pillars and bulbous domes found here are also inspired by Islamic architecture too. That's another religious influence for the list, but here's one more. There is also a possible Zoroastrian influence on the temple. Zoroastrianism is an ancient Iranian religion, considered one of the world's first monotheistic religions, whose places of worship consist of fire temples. Fire and water are agents of ritual purity in Zoroastrianism, which is interesting as the dungeons of Skyward Sword often end with rewards of either fire or water, as with Din's Flame, the sacred reward for conquering the Fire Sanctuary. One interesting set piece in the Fire Sanctuary is the Bridge of Decision, a bridge that requires Link to dive off the correct side in order to survive a fiery fate. The Chinvat Bridge in Zoroastrianism is also occasionally referred to as the Bridge of Decision. The Chinvat Bridge separates the world of the dead and the world of the living, and is a bridge that only those deemed good and worthy enough are able to traverse successfully. Sinners and liars are cast down into the fiery depths below, or swallowed up by fierce demons. Liars in particular struggle to cross Chivnat Bridge, and are destined to have their tongues gnawed by noxious creatures. This is really interesting because if you choose the correct side of the bridge to dive off, then Link lands on a tongue of ice, somehow persisting above the fiery lava. I can't help but feel this little set piece is an allegory to the power of truthfulness. Link is only able to traverse this puzzle thanks to a tip-off from a Mogma, suggesting people are reliant on the honesty and truthfulness of prior adventurers to successfully navigate this puzzle. Wow, you know you've gone too deep when you're discussing ancient Iranian influences on The Legend of Zelda. So that about wraps up this deep dive, exploring some of the real-world ideas that might well have inspired some of Skyward Sword's team when forging the game's most memorable dungeons. I hope I was able to help some people see the depth of love and care that goes into most dungeons in the game. But believe me, there's so many more worldly influences thrown into every Zelda game, it'd take a series of videos to discuss them all. If you've gained a new appreciation for Skyward Sword, then that makes me extremely happy, because I loved both experiencing these dungeons and researching them afterwards. If you enjoyed, consider giving the video a like and subscribing for more gaming stuff in the future. Thanks, and hopefully I'll see you next time.